All right, this is video number 5 on foot strike. I'll do one more wrap-up video after this. I understand this is, running a lot of time, but I didn't want to make a 10-minute video on running because I'm trying to talk to lots of different groups of people out there simultaneously, repeating some of the messages in different ways. I'm repackaging my delivery to re-emphasize a lot of these main points. So if you're watching this video on foot strike, I'm assuming you watched video 3 on stride rate, video 4 on stride length. It's not always cause and effect, but there's a lot of similar themes that are happening here. All right, so we have 3 types of foot strike. We've got heel striking, which most people don't want. We've got what I would call forefoot running up on the ball of the foot or the toe. I know there's big heel strikes and subtle heel strikes. There's big forefoot striking and subtle forefoot striking. We'll talk about each of those. And then there's also a nice solid mid-foot strike. That's how I run, but it's not something I force upon other people. Again, I've used that no plastic mold phrase before. I don't fit round pegs through square holes. It's just an executive decision. Do we have to change your foot strike? All right, first let's talk about heel striking. So there's really bad heel striking, where the leg is almost straight. That's kind of the poster of what not to do when you run. So I'm usually just trying to get people back in here for a subtle heel strike. As long as I see a soft bend in your knee when it hits the ground, I mean, you can see this angle, my foot is still technically too far in front of my body, I've overstrided, so be it. I'm not going to change everyone into a mid-foot strike. That can be based on age, body weight, previous histories, amount of miles they're doing, how much time we have before their peak race. Maybe it's not the right time and place to change it. If I can at least get you from here to here, and we have that soft, subtle bend in the knee, then your joints, tendons, and ligaments look up and say, thank you. It's so much better for, we'll just use the term shock absorption. Okay, there's less braking forces out in front of the body, and then there's also less of that push off with the muscles in the back of the leg. So I'll explain why a midfoot strike is advantageous in a couple different ways. Most runners are heel strikers. Probably always will be, because we have a lot of people coming into the running world now right out of walking. I think the popularity of marathons and half marathons is like a double-edged sword. A lot of runners are getting injured. We see a lot of these statistics on how many runners are likely, what percentage of runners are likely to get injured in the next year or 5 or 10 years or over their career. And, I think a lot of it is people are signing up for marathons and half marathons before they're really ready. That hopefully doesn't sound like a horrible statement, because I've coached and I always will coach people who might be in that category. But, we have ambitious goals, and I'm not trying to tell anybody what they can or can't do. I'm here to help. Every now and then I'll talk you out of something because I care for you and I love you. But most runners are going to be heel strikers. Most of the runners I coach are heel strikers. So again, executive decision, do we have to change this? I'm okay with a subtle heel strike. It's a softer bend in the knee. It's a little bit quicker contact time on the ground, or less contact time on the ground. And there might be other things in your run training or strength training we can focus on until we find maybe a better time and place with a longer timeline to change to a midfoot strike. All right, some overlap with the stride length video. Danny Abshire's book, Natural Running, explains how heel striking, turn this camera down one more time, don't have my lovely assistant with me today. So how heel striking, like walking, is a heel slap push, coming back the other way, heel slap push, and it's that pushing at the end where we have to propel ourselves forward. Going back to the total body lean topic, if I'm a big heel striker and I'm slower than a 10-minute mile, I'm probably straight up and down. And Danny Dreyer of Chi Running also makes the same point. The only way I can get moving forward again is, my body weight's back here, is to push off my foot. So that's overusing the calf. It's overusing the hamstring in a propulsive way And this sometimes causes a lot of tight calves, which then is related to your shin splints. Not all shin splints are created equally, but that's just one of the major themes that they have. So if heel striking is similar to walking, that's why I either want to get you out of a heel strike into a midfoot strike, or I want to get you into a subtle heel strike. And I'm not the headless horseman anymore. But for a lot of you, you can imagine my feet on the ground. I mean, you are basically doing calf raises for 30, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Your heel strike into a toe off is just like the calf raises you might do for strength training. If it's a big heel strike, not preferred. Subtle heel strike, executive decision. A lot of variables go into that equation. Do we have to change it? I'm okay not changing a subtle heel strike. So this is where the emphasis on faster and faster cadence comes back to bite you. You're still heel striking, but now you're just doing it at a faster rate. And again, shoes didn't help, cadence didn't help. So where do we go from here? Some people want to overcompensate and they go into a forefoot strike. That's as equally undesirable in a lot of ways, and I often say I'd rather have a heel striker than a forefoot runner, and I'll explain why that is in a couple minutes. I just made the point yet again in this video series that your shoes will not correct your running form as much as they're supposed to through marketing and what you maybe read online or in a magazine. And we have that 2014 class action lawsuit against Vibram, which again was really bizarre to me that the running shoe company came out and made the claim, yes, wear these shoes, it's going to change your foot strike. And then there was the runners who, I won't pick on the runners too much because they want it to change, but it's not going to be in the shoe. They're inanimate objects. They're not vocalizing to you and telling you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. And I mentioned Danny Abshire's name. He wrote a wonderful book, I recommend it, called Natural Running. And he's also the creator, founder of the Newton Run Shoe Company. And I applaud him for not really trying to promote, market, and sell his shoes with that book. He showed a lot of restraint. He did tell a really nice story about how he came up with the idea for these shoes, and I enjoyed reading that. And I'm very independent in what I do. I don't have any sponsors. I'm not emotionally or financially tied to a run shoe company or a gel pack company or anything along those lines. So I get to just promote and talk about any companies I want. I think the book Natural Running is wonderful, but I don't believe that the Newton running shoes changed as many people's foot strikes just on their own. I think buying minimalist run shoes and getting to a run camp and getting in front of a run coach, that might help you. But otherwise, I would say over the years, about 50, I'll pick a nice round number, a realistic number. I would say about 50 runners have come to me over the last 10 years wearing Newtons. In Washington, D.C., people come from all over the country, all over the world, all shapes and sizes and ages with different running backgrounds and goals. So a pretty representative sample of the whole, just 50 kind of random people in a way, 50 random runners. 49 of those 50 were still heel striking in their Newtons. The change didn't happen. The one runner who wasn't was way up on their tippy toes, prancing around, which kind of defeats the purpose of wanting to come down more toward the actual forefoot or midfoot. So again, I know shoes don't change running form. If it worked for you, so be it. Kudos. But in my experience as a coach, you actually have to teach people how to change their form. Speaking of footwear, I coach a lot of military and law enforcement folks, and they have to do some of their running in camp or for a test in like boots, in military boots. And I tell them, hey, don't worry about your foot strike changing when you put those boots on. If you're a midfoot runner, you're going to midfoot strike regardless of what is attached to your foot. Because once again, when you have, spin around, when you have enough clearance room off the ground, look at all that distance. I could have on, clogs or Marilyn Manson boots, like walking around stage. It doesn't matter. I'm still going to be able to come down into a midfoot strike. So if I have on boots or minimalist run shoes, regular neutral run shoes, flip-flops, sandals, what's attached to your foot should not change your ability to come down with a nice midfoot landing. So there's some peace of mind for some of you. If you're already a midfoot runner and you want to go and change shoes around, within reason, I do not believe that's going to change your foot strike. So the reason that a midfoot strike is more desirable than a heel strike or a forefoot strike is, in one word, it's stability or support or strength, or another S word, stance. Any one of those words applies. When your whole foot is coming down into the ground, you have much more of your foot to actually displace the energy over the entire foot. I mean, granted, from a front and side view here, a heel strike, it happens pretty quickly. So again, if it's a subtle heel strike, the rest of the foot comes down like right behind it. It's very quick. So that's one reason we can kind of get away with subtle heel strikes. But a forefoot strike, as I'm demonstrating kind of up here, we've only got about half the foot coming down into the ground. And I know there's differences in forefoot strikes. I'll talk more about that in a second. But really what I'm talking about is this kind of like prancing around on just half the foot, the ball of the foot, or just the toes. You just quite simply don't have as much stability when only half your foot lands into the ground. And this is the reason why most of the people you see running around on their forefoot, especially all the Vibram 5-finger shoe runners, more years ago because they're much less popular now, but everyone was running around like a 13-minute mile, really super fit people kind of just prancing around really slowly on their forefoot strike, because their brain doesn't trust the foot coming down into the ground from very much higher if it's only going to land on half the foot. It's a protective element built into the forefoot strike. Alright, so I'll demo a midfoot strike, which I'm sure most of you have seen before. Again, it's not something we have to force upon you, but I'll kind of do it in the back row, and I'll keep working my way in closer and closer so we get enough looks at it with my short runway here. So the whole foot, so bring the camera down, the whole foot is kind of coming down in contact with the ground at the same time. I'll kind of hop through it. So a midfoot strike, kind of like some people start with this butt kicking drill. They come down, they land there. So the whole foot is coming down into the ground together. It's like a flat-footed landing. And traditionally, the term flat foot has a negative connotation to it for different reasons. But in this context, it's all coming down together. It's selective timing in the year. If you have a big A race or peak race coming up, we want to think about how much time do we have to let you adapt to the new foot strike. I'm not going to change you to a midfoot strike. We've only got 3 months to go to your marathon. No, because for a couple of weeks or a month or 6 weeks or so, I'm making your long run like 30 minutes. And who in the hell wants their long run to be 30 minutes? But think about people you might know, who I know, who changed to a midfoot strike, made zero change to their training program, and then were hobbling around and thought, phooey, that midfoot strike stuff is a bunch of crap. It's like, well, you didn't change your program at all. It's basically like, not that it's completely the same as jumping rope. I think forefoot running is much similar to, jumping rope, but even a midfoot strike is similar to jumping rope. So if you haven't jumped rope in a long time, and you start jumping rope by running with a midfoot strike, are you really going to jump rope for 2 hours when you haven't done it in years? Yeah, you're going to be fried in your lower leg. So, executive decision. Who are you? What are you training for? How much time do we have to work with? What's your injury history? Where's your body weight relative to your height? And another consideration is that the longer someone's been running with a heel strike and stayed injury-free, they have probably built up some, kind of protective coating, so to speak, where then I'm really not going to mess with their stride. As long as you're hitting your goals and you just have more ambitious goals you want me to help you with, let's keep your heel strike. Hopefully it's probably a subtle heel strike, otherwise you would have had more and more injuries by now. But thinking of age as a factor, do I really want to change the foot strike of a 70-year-old runner? And there's nothing ageist about this comment. It's just that we aren't as strong at age 70 as we are at age 30. Probably some exceptions to that rule that I can think of right now, but you get the general point. So they built up a lot of specific strength relevant or related to that heel strike. I'll keep it. And then, we'll just work on other elements of training at that point. So I'll tilt the camera down again, and from a front view, we can see there's just a moment of instability. When I run with a heel strike, it happens very quickly, but the heel hits, and there's just a little moment of instability. I could have a little bit of wiggle and wobble, and then the rest of the foot comes down, we're pretty stable, but that can set me up for my knee to carry through at some angle. I am absolutely exaggerating right now. Nobody runs like they dance, okay? But there's just a moment of instability, which based on how many steps you take in a run or for weeks and months, it could add up. So for that same reason, when you come down on your forefoot, there's even more room for error for the knee to kind of go left and right. So especially the higher up the foot comes, the more your knee would want to shimmy left or right. So your brain is already well ahead of this. It's already mapped it out and thought it out. So the deal is, the little deal that's struck between the brain and the foot is, all right, foot, if you're only going to give me half of you to work with, then the deal is you have to stay way down here. All right, deal. And that's why you have everyone kind of prancing around. Here's your forefoot strikers. This is about as fast as they run. And they're fit and fiddle. They should be running much faster, some of these folks. But again, there's no trust in this stability. There's no confidence in the support for only half your foot to absorb all that body weight when your foot's coming higher and higher and higher off the ground. Once again, true track and field sprinters, 100-meter dash, 200-meter dash, whole separate sport, whole separate beast of athlete. Let's not drag them into this particular conversation, because they are the pound for pound strength to weight ratio. They are some of the strongest athletes in the world. They're right up there with gymnasts and professional gymnasts, professional wrestlers. That's Greco-Roman style, Olympic wrestling, not Hulk Hogan wrestling style. So just consider, why are these people prancing around, okay? It's a matter of stability, and I will prove this with a couple other examples. But first I would say that the midfoot strike, it has more stability, less contact time, it's more natural with the rest of your leg extension, as I talked about getting some clearance off the ground. You know, as your leg extends back behind you and you get a little bit of lift, even in gear one, it's a little bit extra lift. So I actually have my foot tucked. You can actually come down mid-foot. Better absorption, and then to get going again, I don't have to really push off the ground coming out of a midfoot strike. With a midfoot strike, I basically just get to flick, kind of like the butt kick drill. It's kind of like flick, fall, flick, fall, flick, fall, flick, fall. It's kind of like a wind-up toy. So this little butt kick drill, this little heel flick drill, is a good way to learn midfoot strike, and then it's like someone just pushes you forward, and then off you go again, or off you go with a midfoot strike. So I've kind of demoed this a little bit in other ways in the cadence. Video number 3, stride rate, and video number 4, stride length. I touched upon this in other ways, like different ways we can or cannot correct this element of your foot strike. But if you ideally want to shoot for a midfoot strike, you just get to get away with a flick fall, flick fall, flick fall, flick fall, flick fall. There's not really a push off or a big toe off element to your stride, and that's good news. It's very low energy to get your next stride going. It's just a flick, 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 and how high you flick is just based on how fast you want to run. So I do understand the theory, mostly behind the forefoot strike. The lab results, the lab studies haven't convinced me. Those results, really short term, just one day. We brought runners in, we gave them this instruction, they ran on a forefoot strike, then they left. Here's our results. That hasn't convinced me of very much. I want to see 6 weeks later, 6 months later, a year, 2 years later. I want to see injury rates, because all the forefoot runners that have come to me have all had the same foot, ankle, calf, Achilles, and plantar fascia injuries. And we've been talking over the phone. I've read their email. This is when we're kind of setting up that initial running forum session. And I usually tell them, don't tell me anything about your stride just yet. I'm taking inventory of your injuries and what you read and what shoes you're running in. And I was like, this is going to be a forefoot runner. I know it. Here it comes. So these lab studies are, sometimes selection bias and using a lot of elite runners and pro runners, or just really long-term runners who had a very low body weight. That's one of the only ways you can kind of get away with running long distances at high speeds as a true forefoot runner. You're probably at a very low body weight. Other times, I'll now bring back this part I said I was going to get to. A subtle forefoot strike is probably a hell of a lot closer to a midfoot strike than what some of you amateur runners are doing out there, for which I guess I'm an amateur runner in some ways too, when you're really coming down on the ball of your foot and your toes prancing around. There's a difference between how the pros are doing it with just a sliver of their heel off the ground and how you might be doing it. But either way, the lab studies haven't convinced me that forefoot striking is actually the way to go. All right, some other examples we can bring into the conversation about the forefoot strike. One question would be, it's not the main point, but here's a fun question. Can you name me one other sport where the athletes who are running in that sport are running up on the balls of their feet or their toes or on their forefoot? And I could not think of any sports either. The one that did kind of come to mind when I first thought about this was, well, in baseball and softball, after they swing and they dig out of the batter's box, that's similar to coming out of the blocks in track and field. So some of those initial pitter-patter steps coming out are up on the forefoot. But once they start lengthening their stride down to first base and rounding for a double, they're coming down midfoot or maybe even with a heel strike for the most part. You're not seeing soccer players, basketball players, field hockey players up on the balls of their feet running down the field. Again, it's too much distance for that foot to come high off the ground and then to try to keep sticking that landing on a one-legged squat on just half your foot. The brain says, nope, keep it way down there and we'll let you keep going. Some of you might be thinking, well, forefoot running is just unique to the world of distance running. I touched upon this a couple minutes ago. Consider the professional athletes and what their forefoot strike looks like, where it's pretty much a midfoot strike, and what your way up on the ball of the foot forefoot strike looks like. There was a study back in like 2005 with, if you want to look this up, it's with the NSCA, one of their journals. I remember reading this way back in the day. It was Japanese, I think 10K or half marathoners. They're from their elite team, and they basically just set up a camera just like this, just pointing right down at a midpoint on this track race. I think it was 10K runners in a track race, so they got to see them 25 times. Yeah, that's the math, 25 times. And they just looked at all their different foot strikes, and the way they were splitting hairs between what was a midfoot strike and a forefoot strike, I mean, it was so minuscule, but that was their operational definition, so we'll let it go. But either way, there's still meaning in that splitting hairs definition, because what they weren't doing was running way up on the ball of the foot. All right, another example as I walk in here. Go into your gym tomorrow, load up a squat rack with moderate to heavy weight, and then try to squat that weight on the balls of your feet. It's going to be difficult to do, just for the same reason we wouldn't try to squat that on our heels. When we squat, and most of you watching this, if you've done barbell squats at some point in your life, you've got those feet hammered in the ground, whole foot, and that's how you squat with more stability. And there's something you can say, well, Mike, we're not running with a barbell on our back. Oh, but when you run, and you can look at these force plate studies, in general, when a human is running, an adult, there is a Thor's hammer's worth of force coming down into the ground, regardless of your foot strike. So if you wouldn't squat your own body weight on the balls of your feet, don't expect to run at a faster pace and land on just the ball of your foot. But again, we usually won't see people do that. That is the protective nature of keeping the feet way down here with this pity-patter forefoot strike that we usually see in people. They usually don't have a gear 3, 4, and 5. Third example to talk about forefoot strike and how we can clean this up a little bit. I'll go back to using track and field athletes. This time we're going to talk about the event long jump. And now I will grant you permission to tell me that, well, they're on their forefoot. Fine. But now let's look at long jump. They are coming down the runway before they go into the sand pit. And most long jumpers are 100-meter dash specialists as well. They train together. And they're coming down, forefoot, 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 forefoot. But then what those athletes are coached to do is to take those last 2 steps, whether it's left, right, or right, left, right before they take off, they come down flat, flat, and then they go out into the sand. So they're sprinting, sprint, 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 ball the foot, ball the foot, ball, 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 flat, flat, and then they're off into the pit. Well, what's the point of that flat, flat at the end? What's the point of that midfoot, midfoot at the end? Stability. You want to gather yourself 1, 2 with as much stability as you can down in your foot before you go off into the pit. Otherwise, if you take those last 2 steps still on your forefoot and you have to do this powerful athletic movement, your knee could go anywhere, and that's going to hurt your long jump performance, and it could even hurt something in your leg. Stability is a midfoot landing, not a forefoot landing. All right, so I'll go back here with some distance, and I'll do a 1-3-5 with a forefoot strike out of this is my kind of average condensing of what I've seen over the years, what forefoot runners look like. And I'm sorry if it just really sounds like I'm being critical. I'm just trying to give these different angles and perspectives to reshape it because I want you to be able to run faster if you do have ambitious goals. So going back to that contract between the brain and the foot, how the brain limits the body, limits the foot, says you stay down there, that's all you're going to give me. I've done this, running 101 where I have them go from 1 to 3 to 5, and this is usually what I see for their 1-3-5. There's just no real lift. There's no increase in the range of motion behind the body. So that is your executive decision. If you're just running around your neighborhood for 20-30 minutes, and that's the way you want to run, there you have it. But if you have ambitious goals, and this is what some of these forefoot runners have come to me and said, I think I just got slower over the years. Like, yeah, you lost all of your stride. So that is the message for other coaches out there, perhaps, is to recognize not only like the limits in what cadence is going to do for someone, to recognize how the shoes as inanimate objects aren't really correcting the mechanics. People are still going with that same foot strike, whatever they had, regardless of the shoe. And now to also recognize the limitations in a forefoot strike, how low the feet always are to the ground, why no one's really increasing their pace significantly from 1 to 5. So their track work isn't really track work at that point. So this is, force plate study in a lab versus real world. Apples and oranges to me, big difference. I want to see performance measures and injury reduction rates 6 months, 1 year, 2 years down the road. I think there's one advantage people talk about with forefoot running, and that is that the foot lands underneath the hips. And we can talk about that right now. I'm going to bring this camera way down. I'm going to be the headless horseman again, so bear with me if you can hear my voice. And that landing with a forefoot strike, okay, right here, my foot is back here under kind of my hips or center of mass. But you know what? When I land with a midfoot strike, it's there too. And I can hop back and forth between the two. My foot's never really moving up or back too much. Whether it's forefoot or midfoot, it's always kind of right here under my center of mass. And notice that I'm not saying hips, because if we have a slight total body lean, if we can see that in the camera, if I have a slight total body lean, my chest has come forward a little bit. So you're never really landing with your foot directly under the hips. So coaches, you can gravitate away from that specific phrase if you want to. Athletes who are frustrated that they're not getting their foot down under their hips, god darn it, well, it's damn near impossible. So what we're looking for, the better phrase, it's all about language and semantics, is that you're going to get your foot down under your center of mass. And if you have this total body lean coming forward, my chest has come forward, and now my chest is kind of what's holding my center of mass. My center of mass is kind of right here in my midsection, which technically is a little bit farther forward than my hips. So usually, whether it's forefoot strike or midfoot strike, our foot is coming down not right under the hips, it's a little bit in front. It's under our center of mass, under our chest with the total body lean, not so much under the hips. So that might be some peace of mind for those who are driving themselves crazy thinking about how to do that. All right, so this will be my last point on foot strike, and then I'll do a wrap-up video. But another correction to foot strike that we hear is the instruction is to run quietly. And I've coached a lot of runners who told me that they're trying to switch to a quieter stride. And really what they've done is really slowed down. And they haven't changed their foot strike, because running quietly is supposed to change your foot strike and increase your cadence. But great, you're still heel striking, your cadence is faster, and now you just went from an 8-minute mile to an 8:45 mile. So what's the trade-off? What's your ultimate goal here? So here's what running quietly looks like. Or, so yeah, I just gave you the heel strike and the forefoot strike again. Now I'm sure you can run quietly in a midfoot strike, but most runners aren't midfoot runners, they're usually heel strikers. So the point is that run quietly isn't changing people's foot strike or stride as much as we might think. I do agree with the general notion that it's trying to convey, but you have to understand that, you know, if you're being bombarded with this message to run quietly, run softly, it means you're probably still heel striking and or prancing around. You're just doing it at a faster cadence, and now you're running much slower. If you're running with a midfoot strike, your foot is going to make some noise coming into the ground. I'm willing to bet that there is zero correlation, all else being equal. I mean, let's assume we're not talking about all heavy runners, but very little correlation between the sound you make when you run and injuries, per se. A whole foot coming down into the ground, it doesn't have to stomp, but the whole foot coming down into the ground, yeah, it's going to make some noise. You might hear a midfoot striker coming up behind you from a distance.